Hi everybody, thanks for dropping in. It's Colleen here. I have not done a video in a while. I've had the flu since December, and I just stopped coughing finally only a few days ago. So now I can sit down and do a video for you guys while I'm working. I decided also to wait until I had a page that wasn't real spoilery, so I didn't upset my clients. And I'm just going to sit here and work on this, and we're going to have a nice chat and draw today while I answer some questions from my patrons on Patreon. Today's question comes from Glenn Matchett, and he asks, how do you determine which projects to take on? He's given me permission to use his name here. Let me tell you, I'm such a horrible perfectionist. I spent more than an hour writing down all of my reasons for why I do or do not take on a project. And I guess the short answer is I have reasons, and look at all of them. And by the way, if you see some weird sort of spots on my hands and my arms, I had an accident in the kitchen. I had a little explosion of hot oil, and I've got some burns all over me. So I'm sorry to disturb anybody if you have to see that. It's a little unpleasant to look at. It's even more unpleasant to have it, but things happen, and don't be concerned. It doesn't hurt that much. It's just unsightly. So anyway, back to Glenn. Glenn, thanks for your question. More importantly, thank you very much for being one of my supporters on Patreon. I really, really, truly appreciate it. And I have given this a lot of thought. And I put at the top of my list enthusiasm, whether or not I am truly interested in the project. I used to think it was all about deadlines and money, but now for me it's about whether or not I really want to do it. Because after all the other considerations, I know that if I don't feel it for the job, if I don't have any feeling for the material, any emotional commitment in it, it doesn't matter what it's paying me, it doesn't matter what the situation is with the client, none of these things matter. I'm just probably not going to do a very good job and should set it aside and let somebody else have it. So enthusiasm is a big one. Now, unfortunately, no matter how much I love something, if it isn't going to pay, then I may end up hating it. Many's the time I've picked a job just because I loved it and I didn't think about the long-term consequences of doing it. And I ended up being in a situation where I was basically roped into doing fan art. So upfront compensation is incredibly important, whether or not I'm getting paid enough to make it worthwhile to do the job while I'm working on the job. And when I say upfront compensation, I mean, am I getting an advance against royalties? Am I getting a page rate? Something like that. Because you can make a deal for a job that looks like it's going to be good for you, and they'll say, and when you're finished, you're going to get all of this. And delays, and redos, and changes by the client, and yada, yada, yada. And you may end up working a lot longer than you thought you were going to work. And the job can actually cost you money. I just did a small one like that not too long ago. I think I mentioned it on my Patreon. I'm certainly not going to mention that to everyone in the public, but I actually lost money on a job because things didn't go quite the way I thought they were going to go. There were problems with the materials that I was using to do the job, And next thing I know, I'd spent a huge amount of time and energy on it, and I ended up in the hole. So, wow, you need to be paid what you're actually worth while working on the project. Then the second consideration when it comes to money is back-end compensation. Back-end compensation means things like royalties, incentive, yada, yada, yada. You can really, really get screwed over on that. So you've got to keep it in mind. If you're being offered a job and they say, well, if you take a cut in pay up front, you will get more in the long run if you agree to this lower rate up front. And that you got to sit down and look at that contract and be very, very careful and be sure that that client isn't shining you on. I have gotten contracts where the back-end compensation was so poor, they were basically set up so that there was no way to ever make royalties on them. The books would have to sell ridiculous amounts to make anything back. They'd have to be bestsellers every time, and the client asked for outrageous things for themselves, like the right to get my art on the job, the original art on the job, for very small sums of money. Just crazy stuff, and they were pretty bold-faced about the requests too. So, are you going to get a piece of the licensing? Are you going to get a piece of merchandising? Are you going to get a decent package out of it in the long run? And there are a lot of people who get angry when they hear creators talking about this stuff. They say, well, I don't get a deal when I go and work for my client, and I go into work every day and I don't get a piece of the deal. It's like, well, most people are employees, and they give up certain advantages in order to get things, and to get other things that I personally don't get. I don't get health insurance. I don't get benefits like any kind of retirement. No one pays my Social Security bills, etc., etc. I pay all of that myself. That being the case, I am a self-employed business person, and as a business person, I own rights to my property, and my property is my intellectual property. And because I own it, I haven't sold that property, I have the right to get a piece of the exploitation of that property just as anyone else would. If I owned an oil well, big business person, like somebody working for Google, would not think twice about whether or not I got a piece of the action from my oil well. But they might question whether I, as an artist, should get a piece of the action when I'm working for myself and I have the legal right to get compensation for that. So it's a strange double standard that a lot of people have when it comes to creators. They don't think that we should get royalties, and they don't think that we should get benefits, but they don't generally question the benefits that other people get. I think that's very, very strange, but it's pretty typical. So the back end is all about, what am I getting because I'm not getting these benefits? What am I going to receive in the long run? If this becomes a movie, if this becomes a TV show, or even if this becomes a fairly successful book, am I going to see any benefit from that? And these contracts can be written so that on the surface it looks like you're going to get something, but you read the fine print and you look at the percentages and you can see that you're not going to get anything. There's just no way with the way they have the percentages set up. So you as a creator need to be able to understand that language in the contract, or have someone working for you who understands that language. And I'm afraid not every lawyer is going to understand standards and practices in publishing, and a lot of young creators end up hiring lawyers they shouldn't hire. They hire someone who works in real estate or whatever, and then they wonder why they got screwed over on a deal. So back end collaboration, back end compensation, and front end compensation, big concerns. Another major concern, and this is a huge one, and this is always a deal breaker for me: who am I going to be working with? Who are my collaborators? I need to be able to be on good terms with the people with whom I'm working, or at the very least, I need to be able to know that I don't have to talk to them very much. Fortunately, I've been blessed to work with wonderful people for many, many years, but I didn't have it so well early in my career. I haven't exactly been quiet about it either, but I worked for some pretty awful people. And nowadays I'm spoiled. I'm working for wonderful, wonderful people, and I feel very blessed. I just feel incredibly lucky to get to work with some of the best people in the industry. Well, some of the best. I get to work with all of the best people in the industry. It's a real miracle to come from nothing to something the way I have over the years, and being able to work with great people like Neil Gaiman and Warren Ellis and Joe Straczynski and so on. I mean, holy cow, you just don't get any better from that. I'm super lucky, and I know I'm super lucky. And the caliber of people you're working with can make or break a project, not just in terms of the quality of the work they produce, but also in terms of who they are as people. I don't want to work with jerks if I can possibly avoid it. I try to limit my contact with people who are troublesome. Let me put it that way. And you just saw me pause here for a minute on the art, and that's because I'm looking for my reference. I'm having to draw this character that has only appeared on 1 or 2 pages so far, and I just need to make sure I've got the arch of her eyebrows correct and the slope of her eyelids, that sort of thing. It can play tricks on you, so it's a good idea to check back over and over, especially since I'm working on several projects at a time, and I can get tired or I can get confused, and you just never know what you're going to end up with if you don't pay attention. So, another major consideration, and this is oh so important, and it's often forgotten in the enthusiasm for a gig, and that is, will the publisher support the project? This is the worst. So many times you go and you get this contract and you've got this great group of people working together and you're so excited and you're so happy and you get to working on the project and the publisher just throws it under a bus. They either expect it to sell with absolutely no support on their part. They don't do any advertising or promotion. You don't see anything about it on social media, or they do a limited amount of outreach and they don't support it at awards time. Boy, could I go on all day about how the awards nomination process can get really political. And they just expect it to sink or swim on its own, and they do nothing to help it out. And you'd think if you were a famous creator, or you were rich, or everybody loves your stuff, they just hear about everything as soon as it comes out. That's just not true. Stuff gets buried all the time, including great projects by major creators. There is so much signal out there that, excuse me, there's so much noise out there that anything can get lost. Any signal can get lost, and it doesn't matter who you are. I've seen projects by major creators just bomb, and it's like, why? You know, they're famous. How did that happen? It's like, well, there was just no back end support for them. The client expected it to fly, and since that can happen to famous creators, imagine what happens to the ones that aren't so famous. Editors can have pet projects that they expect to do well, and there's a changeover in editorial, and another editor comes along, and the editor who got replaced, somebody came along, they don't like their projects, they don't want any competition, they don't like the scope and range of their line, so they pretty much kill everything that came before. And that's happened to me on a couple of projects where I had an editor who was a real supporter of something I was working on, and my editor got replaced or left the company or got fired or whatever, and the next editor comes along, they don't like your stuff as much, or they didn't like the last editor very much, and your project dies. They just kill it favorably, and major businessman threw a book launch party for it at his own expense, bless his heart, and the publisher did no support for the book and would not even promote the book launch. Couldn't believe it. I was like, what? Does this even happen? And answer, yes, it does happen. It was very, very sad. We were all really disappointed. The book didn't do nearly as well as we'd hoped, and there wasn't a thing we could do about it. They just threw it under a bus. It was hugely disappointing. It was one of the best things I've ever done, and the editor that came along after and replaced my previous editor just is no fan of mine, was no fan of the previous editor, and that's just the way it is. And she threw us under a bus. So when her line of books got canceled elsewhere, I did not shed a tear. So boo-hoo. It happens to us all. So what's next? Next on my list, the word evergreen. I really don't have much interest, especially these days, in doing projects that don't have staying power. I want all of my projects to be around. I want them to be around 10 years. I want them to be around in 20 years. I want them to be around in 50 years. And that is what an evergreen is. An evergreen is a book that sits on those shelves and gets reordered again and again and again and again. No matter what, it is a perennial on the bookshelves. People like it, people reorder it, it stays in print, and that is what I want to do. I have no interest in ephemeral projects. Now, that doesn't mean I never take projects that I don't think are going to be evergreen. Sometimes I take a project just because I want to do it, but evergreen is a huge consideration for me. I don't think of my work as being disposable and ephemeral. I don't even care if other people think of it that way. I'm sure Charles Dickens thought of his work as being disposable and ephemeral. He was working in, cheap rags at one point, and 100 years later, he's still beloved, it's still around, and you just never know. So I take my work pretty seriously, even when the work itself is not serious. and I want to produce work for my clients and for myself that has staying power. So Evergreen is one of the projects on my list. Another consideration is reputation. Is this project really going to enhance my my catalog? Is it going to enhance the catalog of the client? Is it going to enhance the catalog of the people I'm working with? Is this going to be injurious to my reputation as a creator? Does this really not do anything for my catalog? There are some projects that I've done over the years that I look back at and go, why did I ever do that? It was such a dumb move. I'm not really going to get into what they were. I don't want to insult anybody, and certainly don't want to insult anybody who liked those projects, but I've done a few real dogs, and I deeply regret a few, so that's a consideration. Visibility. Is anybody going to see this thing? I'm sure that goes back to reputation, whether or not it's going to be an evergreen, and whether or not my publisher is going to support it. But visibility means a lot, and there are a lot of considerations behind visibility as well that I don't think people consider. And one of them is projects can take you out of the marketplace for a long time. If you're working on a book and you're going to basically be underground in your studio for the next year and a half, and no one's going to see you or hear from you, you're going to be off the radar. When you come back, and your next book comes out, that's the only time people are really going to see you for a while. It better be visible. A few times over the years, I've worked on gigs that took me out of the marketplace for a fairly long time, and then the publisher canceled them in production. And I've never forgotten how disastrous that was for me on a career level, because the general public doesn't know that you're out there and you're working and you're just keeping your head low and doing your job. All they saw was that you weren't around for a period of time. They think that you're not doing any work, or they think that you're not in demand, or whatever. They don't see you as just being a working pro doing your job. And believe it or not, that kind of thing can really hurt your reputation if the project you come out with after you've been underground for a while doesn't really put you back in the public eye. There are a lot of creators out there who have lively social media presences. They're not necessarily any better than you are, but they do a lot of YouTube videos, or they look good on camera, or they're just very, they know how to market and promote themselves. It doesn't matter if their work is any good. Popularity and quality of work are not the same thing. And if you're somebody who really cares about quality, you are competing with showmen, and that can be rough. So that's something you have to keep in mind all the time. Let's see. Perks. That probably fits in with compensation, but perks are fun as well. What kind of extras can you get? Are you going to be able to get some goodies in the contract, or from working with a particular client, that are going to be either fun for you or lucrative? Are they going to support you with, say, are they going to help pay for some of your reference? Are they going to help pay for you to travel to promote the work? Are you going to be one of those creators who gets to go to the movie premiere, that kind of thing? That's not real high on my list, but if I can get a client to pay for some of my expenses while working on a gig, heck yeah, I'll take that. I certainly want copies of my book when it comes out. I'd like to get as many as possible. I'd like to be able to buy even more copies at a substantial discount so that I can sell them when I'm going to shows. That can end up being a really lucrative perk right there. So there are a lot of things to think about when it comes to perks. A big thing is, or at least it is for me, because I've made a lot of money this way over the years, is being able to buy my own inventory if the book ever gets remaindered. That is, if the publisher loses interest in the project for whatever reason and decides to let the book go out of print, can I buy remaining stock at a substantial discount? Now, one really important thing you have to keep in mind is that publishers like to put in digital deals into your contract that keep your book technically in print forever. You've got to put a stop to that. You've got to make sure that your digital deal and your print deal aren't perpetual. You want to be able to get those rights back at some point if you can. So on the off chance that your stuff ever does go out of print, and even though I've had some stuff go out of print and I've informed the publisher that I want my rights back, they always make a fuss because they never want to give your stuff back, even though they're legally obligated to. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but that's the way it is. However, in some cases, I have been able to get some really sweet deals on buying my inventory. And this is a trick I learned from Harlan Ellison back in the day. And frankly, it saved my butt when the comic book market had some serious problems back in the mid-1990s. I had bought a huge amount of my inventory from one of my publishers. I can't remember, it was a really cheap price. It was something like 20 cents a copy on some books. And I ended up selling them and making, I don't know, about 50 grand on those books. It's a great deal. So perks are good. Get your perks. Let's see. Artistic growth. I'm not sure how much of a consideration this is for everybody, but it's a big one for me. I think if you're somewhat familiar with my work, you know that I often change my style. I try to challenge myself in different ways. I do books in completely different modes with completely different materials and figure out something, and then I go, well, I've already done that. I don't want to do that again, and then I go and do my next book in a completely different way. So I don't like to do the same thing over and over again. If I can avoid it, I get bored really easily. So if I can find a project that lets me work in another style or work with materials I've never worked with before, I'm going to pick that one. Like I said, a lot of artists just do the same thing over and over. I don't know how they stand it. Not that it's a criticism. I mean, people can do whatever they want, but boy, that ain't me. Schedule. That should be at the top of my list, but I think it's interesting that it's not, because I am not always the best person about my schedule. I'm sorry to everyone in the world for sometimes being a real screw up there. what can I say? My eyes are bigger than my stomach. When I see something that I really love, some project that looks really cool, man, it just drives me crazy not to be able to do it. I think I can do everything. I think I have time to do everything, even though I clearly cannot do everything, and I do not have time for everything. I have to be more judicious about my choices. I'm explaining this to me and not to you because I'm not always judicious about my choices. Oh, Lord, how awful is it to admit? But this is an important consideration, even though I freely admit I am sometimes irresponsible about it. I think I'm going to be a lot more responsible about it this year, even though I do have a little bit too much on my plate at the moment. I think that has more to do with the fact that I had the better part of 6 weeks of flu. That was really not expected, and not happy about that. So scheduling, is it going to fit in my schedule? Am I going to be able to make it? Because I do have chronic health issues, and I do sometimes just feel terrible out of the blue. I have to be more careful about fitting in downtime. I don't have as much downtime as I used to, but even though last year was my best year in a long time, I still had probably about 8 or 9 weeks of lost work. There were quite a number of weeks in there where I was maybe 10 or 20% below my game. But I don't really like the way I've done this nose. It looks too tip-tilted, and this lady has kind of a... Let me see if I can fix that. I'm trying to talk to you and draw these things at the same time. Okay. Yeah, I did a project that I finished early last year, which was Snow Glass Apples, and I really, really hurt myself finishing that one. I think the last last month production, I put in 300 hours of drawing for a total of 400 hours in the office. And that's drawing and painting, more like, not just drawing. But that was pretty rough. I don't recommend that. Don't do that. That's not good. But what can you do? Stuff's got to get done, and so I did. And I didn't feel very well after it. I think I wasn't very honest with myself about how well I didn't feel. I was pretty slow for several months after. I was like, "Yay! I'm back and I'm up working and I feel great. Everybody, I'm all right." And I was like, "Oh God, I'm going at a snail's pace." It was awful, and that lasted for months. No matter what. So, what can you do? Anyway, so timing is my next consideration, and that is not the same thing as scheduling. Is this really the right time for this project to be coming out? Some projects are ahead of their time. Some projects are a bit behind it. And maybe it's better to wait, or maybe it's better to just step back and let market forces make the decision for you. Which segs right into marketplace. Is there a place for this in the marketplace? Are you going to be able to sell this puppy? Because no matter how much you love it, sometimes it's just not a market for it. And you know what? There are times when you're just wrong about that decision. There are projects that I've done where they just ended up doing so well, And I didn't see it coming. I'm like, what the heck? What happened there? Where did all those sales comes from? And other projects that I thought were going to be huge hits and nothing. I mean, they just died on the vine. You never know. You never know. The whole scene drives me crazy. I never know what I'm dealing with. I don't make predictions. Like I was actually scared about snow glass apples, wondering if this thing was going to sell because it's such a creepy, pervy story. Naturally, I took that one, but but it did gangbusters. We're in a third print, so yay. You just never know. The world is strange. Okay. My last two considerations are, am I the right person for this job? And that requires a little bit of soul searching, because sometimes you're just not the right person for this job, and other times you are, and other people don't see it, and you have to fight for it. And it's anybody's guess when these two things are in conflict. It flows into considerations about timing and artistic growth and yada yada. And maybe I would like to try this new thing, and then I get into it and it's like, wow, somebody else would have been better for this, and maybe I should step down. Or other times, like, you get hired for it and they're pushing for you to do something in a style that doesn't really suit you, or it doesn't go where you think it should go, and you're getting a lot of pushback and yada yada yada. It can get rough, and especially when you're dealing with an editor who doesn't have your back and is jerking you around. That can get really rough. But in an industry where there's a long history of women aren't necessarily treated very well, and people of color aren't necessarily treated very well. Sometimes the right person for the job doesn't get hired, and sometimes you get hired and you just go, man, this is not for me. It doesn't happen very often, but there are a few jobs I was like, I should have let somebody else have that. And that segs into my other consideration is, do I really need it? There are times when you can be a little bit greedy, and maybe it's better to step back and let somebody else have the gig, which I have done quite a lot. I was working on a project for Marvel a long time ago, and the editor had called me up and said, the other creator who'd been hired for the job was having a baby and they weren't available. And then after I'd begun it, they came back and they said, she really needs this job. And I thought, I can let this one go. I couldn't really let this one go, and I wasn't going to take it from a mother. Like, holy cow. But there were other times when I was like, I've actually had creators like, well, I really need this job, and you don't have any, family considerations like I do, and yada, yada, yada. It's like, I still need to keep a roof over my head, and I need to eat. So playing the I have more family considerations than you do card doesn't usually work with me. But when I have the ability to let a job go and somebody else really needs it, yeah, in the past I've let it go. But I've also been in situations where some people have taken advantage of that, and they just were trying to screw me over. So I feel like I have the right to exercise that discretion, and I do. Ultimately, even having the ability to make that choice is a privileged position. And I haven't always been in that position. If, in the early 1990s when I had people, well, not even in the early 1990s, in the early 2000s, I think, I've actually been screamed at by a couple of people, like, why do you get all the jobs? Like, oh my God. But I don't get all the jobs, and I certainly can't do all of the jobs, and I never did. I never hogged all of the projects that came my way. More importantly, I don't think anybody gets in a male creator's face and gives them that kind of guff, but I could be wrong. But I got that a lot earlier on in my career. I don't get it so much. I think there are plenty of gigs to go around for creators who are willing to put in the effort. Of course, it's easier to get them when you've got a reputation, you've been around for a while, and people know what to expect out of you. So yay! But and being in that position is certainly a great advantage and a great privilege, but it came at a great cost, and it took decades to get there. So I'm not necessarily apologetic about it. Anyway, so I think I have answered this question adequately. Thank you, Glenn Matchett, for your kind question. I think it was an excellent question, and I think I've answered it pretty well. And I've made some progress on this page I'm working on, which I cannot talk about, but I can draw for your delectation today. And I'm going to be doing more of these videos of just me drawing my chat and draws and answering questions over the next week, because I'm working on some scenes that are not real spoilery, and I don't have to worry about pissing off my editor. So this is from an upcoming issue of The Clock, and I appreciate you tuning in today. Thank you for watching. And that's all for now. And now I'm going to turn off this machine and get back to work. Thanks. Bye-bye.